Perhaps the most popular form of divination with the I Ching would be by the 3-coin toss method. You're going to need 3 coins. Usually people consecrate or at least sanitize the coins and clean them very well before they use them. I'm using 3 coins from the Ching dynasty that I inherited from my maternal grandmother. You don't have to use Chinese coins. You can use any coins that you have on hand. Again, I believe so strongly in sourcing locally. When people talk about trying to be authentic, I think if you try too hard to mimic the logistics, so for example, if you see other people that you perceive to be masters using a specific type of coinage, a specific type of pretty much anything, and then you feel the need to get that as well, even if it means going out of your way, I think you might be missing the point. Authenticity is about being authentic to spirit, to divinity, and so you really want to find what's local to you, what you're connected to deeply. If you are connected deeply to antique coins, and rightfully, I mean, logically so, right? Then I highly recommend it, especially if it's something that you can do. But if you're gonna buy, cheap commercial manufactured looking coins just so that they look authentic, I mean, I just don't think that that's really, again, I think you're missing the point. It's better to actually go with authentic coins that maybe aren't Chinese. That's, in fact, to me, more authentic than buying some commercial who knows what. So if you're not sourcing antique coins because that's just something you're interested in, then just use regular coins that you have on hand, okay? One thing I will say is if you're going to do professional readings, then yeah, okay, it makes sense to get Chinese coins. And that has nothing to do with the accuracy of the divination. It has everything to do with just, pomp and circumstance, because clients like the experience. So if you're doing an I Ching reading in a professional setting, then yeah, of course, use, the Chinese coins mainly for the show, for showmanship, so that, your clients get that cool experience. Anyway, so this is how you do it. First, you're probably going to need pen and paper on hand, and you think of the question. I usually hold it in my receiving hand, and then I cup my left hand. Well, this is my dominant hand when it comes to craft, because the dominant hand is sending or pushing chi energy out in, and this is receiving it. So I always cup it so that my dominant hand that sends out energy is hovered over the coins. And then you just think of your question. So for me, I have a question. This is going to be a personal reading for myself. I'm going to say that I don't have a specific question. I just want a message or an omen from spirit or the spirit guides that are around me at this time, just to help me navigate the next few days. Okay? So then you just toss. It's pretty simple. And then there's a supplemental handout that comes with this that explains to you what each of the results are correspondent with. And basically, they're either going to be changing or unchanging yin and yang, respectively. Mine is 2 yin, so that's going to be an unchanging yin. And then you go again. And I have an unchanging yang. So let me just show you very quickly. We're going to be building up. So the first toss was the bottom line. The second toss is the second line from the bottom. So we're going to be working bottom up, okay? And I'll show you again just so that we stay on track. And I do the third toss. And again, each time I'm focusing on the inquiry, and I try to keep in a meditative state, and I try to keep open and receptive to spirit, usually through my crown chakra or through the top of my head, feeling connected to divinity. Okay, that's yang again. And see, so that was my third coin toss, and now I moved up, so it's bottom, up, up. And so you want to go up, okay? And then the next one, again. And this time I have a changing yin line. Now when it's 3 tails, that means it's a changing line, as the supplemental handouts show you. So I mark it with this. There's a whole bunch of different ways you can mark it. It just really depends on you. This is how I mark it. When there's a changing line, I put a little circle on the end just to note for myself that later I'm going to have to change it. And that's an unchanging yin line. And the final toss is another earth on top. Okay, so as you see, I was working bottom up. So this was the first coin toss, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth coin toss. And then when there was either 3 heads or 3 tails, in this case this was 3 tails, you mark it by a circle. Let's say this yang line here, the second one, let's say that was 3 heads, then I would mark it with a circle. Okay, and so then you just create your hexagram. Now the next thing you're going to want to do is note whether or not there were any changing lines. So if there are no changing lines, it's a locked hexagram, and that means there's pretty much a concise message from spirit. The idea of a locked hexagram, I don't have a locked hexagram, is that all of the variables at play for the situation at hand have already been put forth, and so pretty much the traditional idea is that it's a fixed fate and that the outcome is going to happen and there's nothing you can do to stop it, because you know it's the cause and effect. All of the chain of cause and effect has already been pushed forth, so all you can do is sort of navigate and respond to what's going to happen. I know not a lot of people in the Western world are fatalistic. So if you're not fatalistic, there are, of course, alternative ways to interpret a locked hexagram. There's this idea that the oracle has a pretty fixed or firm message for you. If there's a changing line, as I have here, then there's going to be a secondary hexagram. So for a changing line, what you do is in casting the second hexagram, you just change it to its opposite. If it was a yang line, then you change it to a yin. In my case, as you can see, the 4th line is a changing line. I changed the yin to a yang. Okay, so once you've cast your secondary hexagram based from your primary hexagram, I always start by looking at the trigrams at play. So usually what's going to happen is either everything changes and your secondary hexagram, none of the trigrams are similar to the ones from the primary hexagram, or of course there's a common denominator where a common sort of the top part remains the same, where one of the trigrams transfers over. And so for example, in my case, you'll see that the bottom is wind in the primary hexagram, and in the secondary hexagram the bottom is wind again. So that tells me that the trigram wind is significant. Now wind for me, the trigram wind, usually it corresponds with finances, money matters, wealth, abundance, things related to assets and resources. So I see that some of the focus here is going to be on accounting, on finances, assets, business, resources, things like that. That is the trigram that carries over. Then we have earth changing to thunder. So earth is a little bit, in terms of how I would describe the essential energy of a trigram earth, it's more nurturing, it's more passive, it's more submissive. Thunder, it's about a shake, an arousal, a change, it's a little bit more aggressive. So I see the energy changing from something more passive to something more aggressive, more assertive. And now what we're going to want to do is you look in your I Ching book and you go to that page with the graph, and you just look it up again. So first we begin with the primary hexagram. Mine is earth over wind. So I find earth over wind in my graph, and for me that's hexagram 46. And then the next one is thunder over wind. So again, I look for thunder. Thunder over wind is 32. And then I just find the 2 hexagrams. Now the first one is hexagram 46. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to look up hexagram 46. I'm going to read the oracle section of the book, That is the primary divinatory message. And then for me, because I have a changing line, and that changing line is the fourth line. So then in addition to the oracle section, I read the subsequent line that corresponds with my changing line. So if you drew a circle next to the first line, then you would read line 1 of the hexagram entry. Now I drew a circle, or there's a changing line for the fourth line, so I'm going to read the fourth line of hexagram 46. So since I received hexagram 46, I read the oracle section of hexagram 46 if you want to turn to the book to follow along. And then because my changing line, as you can see in the example, the changing line is the fourth line, as you can see. So I'm going to turn to the fourth line. The king makes offerings at Mount Chi. This is auspicious. So then I'm going to read the fourth line, and that's going to offer some instructional value as well. Then I'm going to read the secondary hexagram. The secondary hexagram is hexagram 32. So then I turn to hexagram 32 and read only the oracle section of hexagram 32. Now 32, when there's a secondary hexagram, the idea is that it might not necessarily happen. When there's a secondary hexagram that was cast from your divinatory result, the idea is that not all factors that need to be in play for the algorithm that determines the outcome of your situation have been put into effect. So there's still some things that need to be sort of kickstarted for, fate to, for you to know exactly what's going to go on. So for me, there's some things that I need to do, or there's some actions that need to be taken. There are intermediary steps before the final outcome can be determined, and what those intermediary steps or how to navigate the change so that I can better understand or control the outcome, I look to the secondary hexagram. And again, for me, that's hexagram 32. So if you want to follow along, since the secondary hexagram is hexagram 32, I'll turn to 32 in the book, and you read the oracle section only. So you read the oracle section of your primary hexagram, you read the corresponding line of that hexagram, then you read the oracle section of the secondary hexagram. Okay, so I had asked a pretty personal question. Well, I didn't ask a question, but I mean, there's some stuff going on in my life. So I'll just attest that the divinatory result is really accurate, and it's a little too personal for me to try to explain how it applies to me and how I interpret it. So I'm actually going to just make up a completely different hypothetical. So let's say somebody else that has nothing to do with me, and I'm going to try to really change up the facts so that it's a totally different scenario. Okay, so let's say I'm doing a general reading and I get hexagram 46, and the secondary hexagram is hexagram 32. So 46, generally speaking, there's this idea of a new venture, a project, or an undertaking. The seed has already been planted. So at this time, at this juncture point that we're getting the divination, the seed has already been planted, but we don't see any results yet. So now we're just waiting for something to happen. We're waiting for results. And so they're saying that fertilization has taken place, and we're just waiting to see what's going to happen. But on the horizon line for you is a new venture, a new undertaking of some kind, and that there are small victories. So that's sort of also managing expectations. The oracle is saying it's a victory, but it's a small victory. And this idea of the primary and secondary hexagram sharing the same trigram of wind, I'm going to look very carefully at wind. You can turn in your book to the trigram for wind if you're not that familiar with the correspondences for the trigram. So here I always look for signs and omens. Now, sometimes it has to do with the directionality of what wind corresponds with. If you are a Chinese Taoist magician and you work with the 8 immortals, the Baxian, then maybe it has to do with the an area of life or something that the patron immortal overlooks, or it has to do with some of the areas of life that correspond with the trigram. So like I said earlier, wind has to do with money, finances, assets, and resources. It also is about a gentle push, a gentle nudge moving forward. So there's all of these correspondences that you're going to look at, and the practitioner then interprets the possibilities that correspond with wind and figure out how that might play in. And this is where your intuition comes in, to try to figure out how that might factor into the question at hand or for the querent at hand. And also you're going to look at what's changing. So when the trigram has changed entirely between the primary and secondary hexagrams, you look at that as well. Then you look at the specific line. So for example, because I have 2 hexagrams, there was a changing line, there was the 4th line. I read the 4th line. Incidentally, we can do some, this is a sort of it's a good teaching moment here, interestingly enough. So if you turn to hexagram 46 to follow along and you go to the 4th line, the 4th line reads that the king makes offerings at Mount Chi, the western mountain, and this is auspicious, there is no blame. When you see the term there is no blame, it means something more specific. It's just, I like to say it means shit happens. And I think that's really just the best way to put it. I don't have a more poetic or eloquent way to put it. But when it says there is no blame, the oracle is telling you shit happens, you know, so something might go awry, but you can't go around looking for a fault or trying to figure out who to blame or what the cause is. You know, again, shit happens. And so it's just saying that, you know, just watch out. Something's going to, you know, go haywire, but, you know, just keep your cool and stay focused. Don't necessarily go looking for the cause of that or try to figure out who you can blame or wag your finger or point your finger wherever. Now, in terms of the king making offerings at Mount Chi, that seems kind of coded and difficult to understand, but it is telling a story. So it's a reference to a story. It's a reference to this cultural concept historically in Imperial China, where if you're extremely and fiercely loyal to an emperor or a king, then the king awards your loyalty by giving you burial grounds on this particular mountain, which basically only the royals are allowed to be buried, and it's a very auspicious place for burial. And so there's this idea of being rewarded in your afterlife, or a legacy, this idea of legacy coming after you. So even after you're gone, what you're doing is going to implement a legacy, or it's about something that comes after you that is going to be kickstarted at this time. And so you read all of these sort of energies and try to figure out how it might apply to the specific question at hand, or how it might apply if it's a general reading. You just sort of talk about the various energies that correspond with the divinatory reading, and then sort of let all those different possibilities sink into the querent, so as time progresses, they can sort of see how the energies are going to unfold. Now, because I have a changing line, there was 2 hexagrams cast. That means my future is not yet cast in stone, so there are still things that are up in the air, and, you know, things might not go as planned necessarily, because again, there's things that need to there are variables that are still at play. And hexagram 32, my secondary hexagram, point to what's still at play. So then I turn to the entry in my book for hexagram 32, which basically is basically a kick in my ass. It's basically saying you really need to do more work, you need to put in more effort. If you are still or inactive or passive or holding yourself back, then things aren't going to go your way. So hexagram 32 is essentially about having to sort of take more action, or to up the ante and to do more. Otherwise, if you do nothing, then actually nothing is decline and nothing is decay. You're also going to see in the notes for the entry of hexagram 32 where I make some annotations, and I talk about how 32 is often a reference to the institution of marriage. But it doesn't necessarily just need to be marriage. It's institutions in general. It's about these social institutions that we are members of, or that we agree to partake in, and how we navigate those social institutions. Again, you know, this was an actual divination for me, so it's pretty personal. I didn't want to really explain how it applies to me, but, you know, rest assured it applies pretty specifically. It's very specific, you know, just in terms of giving you personal testimony. Like, the reading was extremely specific. I didn't need to do a whole lot of sort of embellishment or personal interpretation as a practitioner. I really felt like the oracle spoke to me directly. The lines spoke to me directly. It really just sort of hits the nail right on top of the head. It's very spot on. And I feel like I didn't really do anything. You know, it's not like kind of like a tarot reader or astrology where you have signs and symbols and then there's an interpretation and, you know, different levels of proficiency kind of come through. I feel like with the I Ching, and this is just my opinion as a practitioner, it's just, in my opinion, so powerful and potent that I really feel like as a practitioner, I didn't do that much. You know, it just pinpoints exactly what I need to know right away. But where the practitioner's power comes in was in the divination process. And so I think, like I'm going to talk about in some of the subsequent video lectures, the I Ching is powerful, or maybe it was the previous video lectures, I can't remember now. Space-time is non-linear. I can't remember which the order of the videos, but in one of your video lectures I talk about how, you know, the I Ching is powerful in a practitioner's hand. It sort of comes alive with esoteric powers if you are a practitioner and a priest or priestess. And so I think there is this sort of ongoing lineage of exclusivity when it comes to the I Ching. They're really, when people talk about how do you interpret the lines, I feel like it's not about the interpretation. As long as you have a pretty solid translation with annotation so that you just freaking comprehend what the lines are. The power is in the hands that you really don't control. So once you're connected to the I Ching, then I just feel like the oracle speaks directly to you, and there really isn't that sort of intermediary step of having to translate or interpret. And the whole power is in the actual divinatory process.